tonight we are thrilled to be joined by Neil Carter. Neil writes the blog Godless in Dixie, which chronicles the thoughts and struggles of a former evangelical Christian learning to relate to life as a skeptic in the Deep South. And I know you do many other things besides that, but welcome, Neil. Glad to talk to you tonight.
Good to be here.
So we're gonna start where, I mean, I'm sure you get asked this a lot, just with the kind of blog you write and the work you do, but I want to kind of start with your like origin story from, evangelical Christian to where you are now. So can you kind of talk to our audience a little bit about your path from religion to, well, not.
To not.
To not.
Right. Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up in Mississippi and was a Southern Baptist. So my background is very, very evangelical. And I grew up in a mega church. And I was sort of marginally involved as a child. My family was involved, but it was nominal. And it was around my teenage years, at about age 16, that I got saved at a youth evangelism conference. And I hit the ground running. I was gung-ho for my faith and stayed that way for about 20 years. And first thing I did was, besides teaching Bible studies and Sunday school and occasionally going on little evangelism tours and preaching and things like that, was that in college I minored in Bible because I was told that I could save it for seminary. And then I went to seminary, to Reformed Theological Seminary. So I got a little bit of Baptist, a little bit of Presbyterian. The only major tradition in the Protestant world I didn't get into was the charismatic world. That just didn't really fit me. But anyway, I left the Southern Baptist life in my 20s and joined up with a home church movement. So I really sort of had a broad spectrum of experiences. And the home church experience was part of an experiment myself. I was taught as a Baptist that we were trying to be as New Testament as possible. So I dove into that and studied what the New Testament church was like, and decided at one point that home church, something more informal and more participatory, was what I wanted. And I did that for about 10 years. What they don't tell you is that the more serious you are about your faith, the more you start to see where the holes are, and you have to figure out what to do about that. Mm-hmm. That's actually the last post that I wrote, was called basically, what did I call it? I don't remember. It was our biggest mistake was we did just as we were told to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That was, we read the Bible, and we studied the New Testament. We studied the church history, and we studied theology, and we devoted ourselves to it entirely. And it was precisely because we were so into what we were doing that we began to see where the holes were and where the gaps were. So it was in my mid-30s when I finally got to the point that I realized that I didn't really believe everything anymore. It took a number of years for me to get to that point where I had run out of rationalizations. And I've maintained for a long time that the people who hang on to their faith the longest are not the ones who aren't as smart. It's the other way around. Sometimes the smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing what you believe. Mm-hmm. So those of us that made it into our 30s or even our 40s, we just got really, really good at rationalizing all of the gaps and holes, And so I have a lot of patience for people who are still in the process of doing that, and very little judgment, because, I'm a little bit embarrassed that I made it to 35 before I really realized that I didn't have good reasons to believe these things anymore. But at that point, my whole life was built around my faith, and it was built around ministry, and it was built around the home church. So when I finally realized I didn't believe it anymore, everything started to fall apart. First thing to go was the social life, because my entire social life was built around church. And all the people that were my closest friends growing up, they're all ministers in different capacities. Mm-hmm. And, it's not even a matter of a rejection on purpose from anybody. It's just that if church is your whole life, it's really hard to bond over anything, because it's your life. Eventually, my family broke apart as well. That was the most painful part of my story, is that there were a lot of issues that we had to work through. But the biggest issue was that when my wife and I came together, we came together because of a common passion for the Lord, for our faith.
Yeah.
And when that was gone, that changed the dynamic entirely. And even when it came to working through our differences, we didn't have a common reference point or framework to appeal to. And so sadly, that didn't work. And we tried for about a year to work through our differences, and then decided we had to go separate ways. So there's definitely been a lot of loss on my end, and people don't trust you in Mississippi if you're not a devout person.
Yeah.
It's okay if you're just sort of lukewarm, and maybe you're into sports or hunting or whatever, but just not much of the church. But to be an actual atheist, to use the A word, that's just going over the line. But for me personally, I had to go in and embrace that identity, because for everyone else where I live, your faith determines everything about who you are. It's like one of the first things they want to know is what kind of church do you belong to. It's in the first 2 or 3 questions they ask you when you move to a new area. And so for me, I got to the point where I realized I had to go on and embrace that label. And at first I was closeted. I didn't tell anybody about it. But I was outed by other people. I was teaching middle school a few years back, and one of my students was stalking me on Facebook and found that I had liked several atheist pages. And she came to class the next day and raised her hand and said, "Mr. Carter, are you an atheist?" And I changed the subject, and eventually they asked again, and I said, "That's really not your business to know what my religious beliefs are." And they were like, "Why didn't you say no?" Because every other teacher they have said, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian." In fact, most of them are very overt about their faith, and they wear it on their sleeves around here. So at any rate, the word got out that I'm an atheist, and that's like up there with child molester and like drug dealer. No, I'm completely serious.
No, I believe
is, right?
it's just the subtle irony of like the history of that is the Catholic Church. And
oh, I know, and there's a lot of irony there.
Podcast.
Yeah, well, at any rate, I lost a lot of people's trust very quickly, and I can actually physically see it happen. I because of where I live, I have to keep this to myself as much as possible. So I started a blog. Now, really, I didn't start out with a blog. At first I was very closeted, but even with the blog, unless you're a blog reader and you like to read skeptic stuff, I'm in a bubble. So it's not like everybody in Jackson, Mississippi would automatically know that I'm an atheist and that I write. In fact, at my current job, I don't even go by the name Neil, because that's my middle name, and I go by my first name. So the students are always trying to pry into my personal life, and I have a Google problem, because now I've done enough things, and I've even been on CBS once and been on a number of podcasts, and so it's very easy to find me if you search the name Neil Carter. So whenever they ask me, "Coach Carter, what's your first name?" "Mr. Carter, what's your first name?" I tell them it's Mr.
That works. Yeah,
it helps. Yeah, or Coach. And at any rate, it's caused a lot of problems at work too, because once my principal found out that I was an atheist, she raised it up as an issue. And you're not legally supposed to be able to do that. But she did it anyway.
Like,
you're not supposed to be able to.
What was said?
Okay. She came to my classroom. It was the morning after Barack Obama won re-election. She was on a warpath.
So she's in a bad place already.
She was in a really bad mood.
They're looking for anybody at that point, probably.
Just target practice.
Yeah.
Well, I live in a very red state, and if you look at the map, the county that I was teaching in was the reddest of all the counties in the metro area. It's well known. Rankin County Schools, in fact, has made the news a number of times because the American Humanist Association has had to sue them for overt proselytization. But that's where my children were going to school, and I transferred to their school because I wanted to be where they were. So I was trying to be very careful not to rock any boats, make any waves. That's one of the reasons why I didn't protest when she brought this up. But she came in and she was upset, and she told me that she didn't want me talking about politics or religion anymore in my class. So here's the problem: I was teaching history. So I don't know how you're supposed to teach history and not talk about politics or religion.
So yeah, what does that look like? That's a completely like reimagined, or like let's just erase and like black out some things in the textbook. Like how does it even work?
No, but she just didn't want me addressing the issues because she didn't trust how I would lead the discussion. She thought that I would, I guess, try to indoctrinate the children into my godless atheism. And I mean, the very next chapter was going to be the history of Christianity, which I was more qualified to teach than anybody at the school because I actually have a graduate degree, in Christian studies and studied a lot of church history. But I'm extremely careful with how objective I am in the way that I teach, way more than the other teachers were. That was the big irony. We had been following the election up until that point, and I had successfully taught a group of 7th graders how to track the Electoral College, which in the last election was actually pretty easy to do. This election was a completely different story. But in the last election, we predicted 50 out of 50 states correctly 2 weeks before the election. Wow. We got them all correct.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that difficult because it was a different election. It was a different world. And Russian hackers weren't involved. Yeah. But at any rate,
they weren't involved this time. Just microwaves and.
Right. Yeah. So at any rate, she said no politics or religion. And when I asked her why that was the case, because that's discriminatory behavior, by the way,
right.
She said, well, there's talk in the community that you told your students you're an atheist. And then she folded her arms and waited for me to respond. And she was tapping her foot. I was so stunned, I didn't know what to say. If I could go back and relive that moment, I would have pushed back immediately and said, are you saying that I'm supposed to teach differently because I have been labeled as a different religious set of beliefs? Anyway, what I did was I just sat there in stunned silence. She finished her speech and she left, and I emailed her later and I said, let me see if I understand this correctly. And I spelled out what my questions were. Yeah. And she dodged the questions. And she said, we'll talk about it in the next meeting. And we didn't. And we didn't in the next one or the next one. So finally, I started trying to go through the appeals process. And this is a very, for the lack of a better word, incestuous county leadership.
Yeah.
Everybody
all kind of knows each other and is
all related to each other.
Natalie's a former school admin, and I'm a former teacher at I imagine a
small school system,
very small rural school in Indiana. So
all of the leadership was related to each other. So the appeals process was completely non-objective and rigged. Mm-hmm. I even tried the teachers union, but Mississippi's a right to work state, so the teachers unions have no power at all. Mm-hmm. At any rate, at the end of that year, they told me they weren't bringing me back. And when I asked why, they said, since this is your first year teaching for our system, we don't have to give you a reason. Mm-hmm. Of course, I knew what the reason was because the principal had laid out all of the rules halfway through the year. And not only that, but 2 months later, they moved me out of my history class in the middle of the school year and put me in a math class.
Because they just didn't even want you to have that platform.
Right. So they figured I couldn't do any damage in math. I mean, how am I going to bring up atheism in math?
This is the atheist theorem that we're talking
about.
Right.
Well, Hemant Mehta also taught math for a while. And his joke was always that, the only chance you get to bring in atheism was when we're talking about imaginary numbers.
Right.
Numbers are imaginary, just like God.
And just leave that and leave the room.
Right. And then drop the mic.
That's it. Bye.
So, I decided math actually was a good idea from here on out because I'm less likely to piss off anybody if I'm teaching math. So I went to start working for some inner city school districts. And that's essentially what I'm doing now is I work inner city, lower income, lower performing schools. And I like the school that I'm at right now, actually, even though their scores aren't great. It's some good people, but it's easier to keep a low profile that way. And they're just happy for me to be there and to do my job, and which I love. So it's working out, but I know I can't be out completely about who I am because it always leads to trouble. The last school that I taught at, I would be gone for a conference, and when I came back, kids were carving the name of Jesus into the walls and into the desks.
That's like a little creepy.
Yeah, I came up with a term for it. I called it evangelism.
Ooh, I have on my phone that says evangelism. Oh, wow.
Well, that was me. I made that up. You're welcome.
Well, thank you, because that's fantastic. But that's really weird.
Well, what happened with that school was that there's some pretty rough kids, and then there's the good kids. And the good kids are all church-going kids, and they're the ones that kind of keep the bad kids straight whenever they're trying to act up. I mean, the teacher does too, but I would be gone for a conference, and there would be a sub, and it would be up to the good kids to watch the bad kids. But the problem is the good kids, the church-going kids, they found out about the blog into my second year, and they started lecturing me. I mean, I had this one girl come stand over me at my desk one day and tell me that she knew why she was in my classroom. And I said, because you need to learn geometry? And she said, no, God brought me to this classroom so that I could minister to you and influence you and save you from yourself. And I said,
sweet child. Oh, child.
Yeah.
That's
amazing. I have a child your age, and I changed her diapers, and anyway.
Just know, But that's interesting to me, though.
Yeah.
Like that, like how bold that is. That
Yes.
they feel like just by them having this belief,
Mm-hmm.
and you heathen atheist teacher, even though you are like, can either of you imagine going up to your teacher and just like, listen, I've got a lecture for you? Like,
Right.
who
Yeah.
does
No, I can't even
that?
imagine it. But they felt empowered by their,
Right.
their pastor's charge to go out and save the lost. So yeah, I've got a post called "Christianity Has a Major Boundary Problem."
For real.
And it's about that very thing. It's even children, and I've had my own child at age 11 lecture me about my path that I'm on. And I know why she does it. It's because she goes to a church several times a week and has people telling her people that do not believe in Jesus are going to hell. And I had to sit down one night and tell the youngest child, something comforting, anything I could come up with, when she was in tears telling me that she believed I was going to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And she had just gotten saved herself, had just had a profession of faith, had just gotten baptized, and they were giving her all the new, introductory, lessons about being a new believer. And one of the things they tell you is, and now when you die, you get to go to heaven and be with all your loved ones, all the ones who believe in Jesus at least. And they're like, well, what about Daddy? Well, he doesn't really believe in Jesus. And then the tears start coming. And so one night when it was time for me to put her to bed, she was in tears, clinging to my leg. And I asked her what was wrong. And she explained it's because she didn't think I was going to be with her in heaven. And I had to sit down and try to talk her through that. And obviously that's not a point where you can start and say, honey, hell is bullshit. I promise it's not real. Like, I can't tell my, whatever she was, I think 6 at the time. I can't tell her that. So this kind of relates to a question that you had sent me before, which was, how do you deal with the people who don't believe? How do you live in environments like that? Yeah. Especially for children, I'm not going to sweep the legs of their entire belief system as the only person in their life who is a non-believer. That is foolish, because it will not work. That's not even good child psychology. I've had enough psychology and teaching classes to know that the first thing they teach you is that you're supposed to engage prior knowledge, right? You start by figuring out what they know and then building on that, rather than trying to come in and introducing an entire new framework that they don't even have hooks for, right? So I started out with what she already believed, which was that God is a father who loves his children. And I began talking her through the idea, that if God loves us, then he's not going to let terrible things happen to us. Certainly not just because we don't believe the right things. That doesn't even make any sense. And so we just kind of talked through it. And I know I didn't change her theology, but at least gave her a slightly different perspective to make her a little bit less terrified so that she could go to sleep. That's a difficult position to be in, though.
Because just the thought of all of that for children, and any teaching around, like, you have to behave a certain way in order to receive future rewards, or if you don't believe and you don't behave this certain way, there's a really terrible fiery place awaiting you.
It's gonna burn you forever.
And
that's terrifying to a child. And I don't see how that's not on some level of low-key emotional abuse to literally threaten a child that, hey, you need to go save all these people if you care about them. If you don't do that, then that reflects on you, because you didn't do your job as a good Christian well enough.
Dereliction of duty on your part, right? So, and we experienced that. Yeah. People who are deconverts where we are, you probably know what I'm talking about. We experience that from all angles, because there's parents, there's cousins, there's sisters, there's brothers, there's friends, there's classmates, and every one of them feels that God has called them to get you saved again. You're everybody's project.
Yep.
And it doesn't always mean they come at you with coercive, pressuring tactics, but a lot of times in the Deep South, it's very passive aggressive kinds of coercion, and sometimes it's even that they just load you down with sweetness. They're super nice to you sometimes. And that is even ickier to me, because I'm like, you know what, don't be nice to me just because you think it's going to butter me up to get me resaved.
Is it do they feel pity for those of us who don't believe? Do they feel responsibility to make more people enter like God's heavenly kingdom, and then do they get rewarded better? Like, what do they think about us?
Well, I don't think that it's just about getting trophies per se. I mean, I think there are some people that are looking for notches in their belt, but when we're talking about people that are close to us, like our family, it's just that, they really think that we're going to suffer. Mm-hmm. And they're afraid that the only way to love us is to make sure we don't suffer. So, of course, they're going to keep pressuring us in 1,000 different ways. I mean, in a sense, I kind of can't blame them. I understand why they're doing what they're doing. But in another sense, yeah, it's not productive. And I have to sit them down sometimes and tell them, you cannot come at me with these messages because they only backfire. First of all, it won't scare me for you to say that I'm going to hell, because I think that's absurd.
Yeah.
In fact, would you like for me to sit down and break apart why I think hell is absurd? I can start listing the reasons why it doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah.
And I could do that. I'm kind of itching to do that the next time somebody in my family wants to do that. But for the most part, I just have to tell them, don't you see how that's counterproductive to come at me with these fear tactics? Mm-hmm. Number one, it's not fearful for me since I don't even believe in it, and they can't seem to conceptualize that sometimes.
Yeah.
How can you be afraid of hell if you don't think it's real? But even then, it wouldn't be a successful tactic just to cover somebody with fear, And I know that must be something that works on them at a level, and that's why they're using it on me. But it, obviously doesn't work on me. There was a time where I would have been scared by that, but I mean, now, like I said, it's just absurd. I've deconstructed the idea to my satisfaction, so it doesn't really hold much power anymore.
And so, like, obviously when people have, this really strong religious belief, and it's tied to so many things. It's tied to community. It's tied to their sense of connection to the world and how they live and all this. And then it seems like, okay, that there might be a misconception that we don't really have anything that we're like believing in or like living for. We believe in nothing. I remember when I was working at a private school, I was having a conversation with another teacher, and she was talking about her church, and I was like, yeah, I don't go to church. And she asked me with like this look on her face, like, are you an atheist or something? And I was like, well,
did she whisper the word?
It was like, it was so bizarre. She backed up slightly when
yes, they will physically get distance.
They do that. So, and I was like, well, yeah. And then her follow-up question after the look of shock kind of wore off her face, she's like, well, are you telling me that you believe in nothing? And I was like, well, I mean, I don't believe in God like you believe, but I believe in love and each other and like being a good person, because like this is all that we have. Like I had to go on this thing where I felt almost like I had to say, yeah, I'm not like some reptilian thing that is just like,
But you can't prove that you're not.
We can't prove that I'm not, but like, we'll just go with like, I'm a human. But it was an odd experience, because I think there is that quality of like, they don't necessarily get that you can have meaning.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, ideologically, they've been taught that morality comes from your religious beliefs. Mm-hmm. That they believe that character and ethics and goodness, they're all derivative traits from being connected to Jesus and the Holy Spirit. So if you don't have those things, then obviously you can't access those traits. You could try to maybe mimic them, but even then, it's supposed to fail somehow. And so ideologically, they can't understand, since for them, the morality is always tied to their religious beliefs, and it's tied to pleasing God. So if there's no God, then now you feel you can do whatever you want, like murder and rape, as if that's what we want.
Right. Yeah.
They don't understand human nature. And that's part of the problem is one of the central tenets of Christianity is that human nature is terrible. And that is perhaps the most important linchpin belief to Christianity. As much as I don't like to admit it, because progressive Christianity tries to move away from that and have a more positive view of humanity, but they always reach this point where they snap back and say, but there has to be a central need for saving somehow. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any point in Jesus. So that core belief in humanity being bad is just something they can't shake. So you have to have something powerful to overpower that and get you out of it. And that would be the Holy Spirit. So if you don't have that, then you're out of luck. And then if they come from, depending on what kind of tradition they come from, the more fundamentalist traditions also are very literalistic with the way they believe things. I had a little bit of that in my background. They're literalistic in the way they think about end times, eschatology. They're into believing that. I read that somewhere in Sweden, they're starting to put microchips in people's hands to track them at work, and they can use it to scan their accounts to buy things. And of course, I had a grandmother that told me that was going to be the mark of the beast. And to this day, they are certain that the chip is going to be in your hand or in your forehead, and that's going to be the mark of the beast. And they're scared to death. So they're very literalistic the way they read the Bible, looking for like future things. But they're also literalistic when they think about like having spirits inside of you. You've got a spirit in you that God, I guess, put into you when you were born. And when you die, either it's going to leave your body and go to heaven, or usually that's what they think. And they're kind of fuzzy at that point, because then what happens to you in the intermediate state? But somehow or another, your spirit goes to heaven, which means that you've got something inside of you that's alive if you're a Christian. And if you're not a Christian, you either don't even have it, or it's there, but it's like dead. So there's like this whole part of you that doesn't even work. It's like having an organ missing. They're very literalistic, some people, the way they think about those things. So when you've got somebody looking at you and you say, I'm an atheist, they suddenly have now shifted into believing you're a different species, right? I mean, you're a completely different species. You lack an entire part of yourself that they have, and they don't know how to relate to you. Because to them, everything is geared towards that part of them functioning. If you don't have it, then they don't know what to do with you, except try to get you saved.
Well, and even listening to you talk about how you've had to and still have to sort of hide parts of your work and your identity. Yes. I mean, that to me, because I've felt that too, working in and I live in Maryland, right outside of DC. It's not like a conservative Christian, whatever, but there's definitely a vibe. Like when I mean, my job was, I don't do it anymore, but I was the administrator of a small private school, and like I wasn't necessarily hiding that, but I wasn't exactly talking about it either, because there's definitely like that experience I had with a coworker. That like, like, who are you type of thing.
Right.
And so
no, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, for me, like I never had even like the worst experience I had whenever like telling somebody I'm atheist or whatever. And maybe it has to do with just how like fucking arrogant I am. But when it was telling my mom, because she of course she cried, and I was like 12 or 13 at the time, and she cried. She was upset because like we talked about on the episode that of the podcast that came out today. I got a message to the page saying somebody thanking me for causing her to fail as a mother because her child likes my page and is now atheist as a result of my page. And it was like the weirdest like message I think I've ever gotten. But it's like these people, like they've internalized it so much that they feel like it's a failure. Like she's blaming me for like something that I think is good that we're teaching like rational thought, or we have rational thinkers, but now that's a bad thing that he's able to think independently and not like be indoctrinated, break that cycle of indoctrination.
They don't think about it as indoctrination. There's a lot of fascinating sociology that you start to discover experimentally as you come out as an atheist. One of the things you find out is that, first of all, people's religion is very tied to their personal identity. So you cannot question passively or actively their core beliefs without it feeling like a personal attack on them. And you can try to explain there's a difference between disrespect and disagreement. We should be able to disagree without being disrespectful. But for most of the people I know around here, that does not make any sense. I can say those words, but they just don't see it that way. For them to disagree with a religious belief is disrespectful. You don't do that out loud. It's fine if you want to do it in the privacy of your own home. You can believe whatever you want because this is Merca. But you cannot say it out loud. Now, if they want to say their beliefs out loud, that's fine. Actually, it's good. People who go out and demonstrate their beliefs get praised for it around here. Our local business people and politicians, they wear their religion on their sleeves. They make a show out of making sure they're in church every Sunday morning. Their commercials during election season talk about their faith. They'll have a Bible out and they'll read with their family and have a little devotional time on camera, staged for that. It's very central to Southern culture in particular, but it's a part of their identity. And so you cannot say, I don't believe those things without them taking it personally. And another thing that I discovered is how much, Greta Christina has talked about this, but religion is based on such a flimsy empirical base. It's a social construct, and it's passed along socially, which is why it's so tied to our identity. Our parents passed down something to us, and so it's a part of our heritage. And to question that or reject it, much worse, is to reject our heritage, and it's like a shame on our family. But because it's a social construct, that means the strength of it depends on social consent. There's this unspoken rule that as long as people agree that this deserves respect, then it maintains its strength. But if I step away and say, I'm no longer in that camp, I've just removed one notch off of that consent, which means even if I never say a negative word about Christianity and just say I no longer believe, I've now insulted them because I've removed, it's an attack. I've taken a leg out from under the table that their faith is resting on, because it's a social construct and I'm a part of that social fabric. So when I remove myself, I've just damaged them, whether I want to or not. And that's the frustrating thing, is there's no neutral way to be an atheist. Greta Christina's point was that, it's not the same as like sexual orientation. You can tell someone that you're gay, but they don't immediately assume that means that you think they should be gay too. Right? So as offensive as it might be, most people can gather the idea, they can grasp the idea that just because you're gay doesn't mean you think I'm supposed to be gay. But if you say you're atheist, now they feel like you must think they're foolish, because you should be the same thing. They should be the same thing you are. You know what I'm saying? It's a totally different dynamic, which means the moment you publicly say you're an atheist, you've now gone up a notch as a villain. Before you were just something to be pitied, Yeah. But now you're an enemy. And I'm talking about, you don't have to be proselytizing. I'm talking about just publicly naming yourself as an atheist. It's an act of war to them. And that means that the moment I came out, I started writing only after I had lost a teaching job. I had lost a family. I had lost pretty much all my friends. Again, not entirely their fault. And had lost whole social life, then lost a job. I said, what's there left to lose? I'm going to just start writing again and let whoever finds out, find out. And I've mostly lived that way for the last few years. But then each time I start a new teaching job, I'm quiet for that first year because I need to get past that first year. And then when I'm past that, I can start coming out a little bit more. So hopefully I can come back to the school next year, and then I can start coming out a bit more again.
So in general, then, like, how do we make, I don't know, like, our voices sort of heard and understood better, where we're like, is there a way for us to not be the villains and just like being an atheist, it's a normal thing. Like, we're just,
I don't mind the idea of being a villain. I never thought of it like that.
Okay, Dan wants to be a super villain.
You could be a villain, that's great.
He could be the villain. I'll be the nice one. I
didn't say I wouldn't be nice. Cop, right? I mean, I can be nice and be a villain.
We're good cop, bad cop anyways.
Right. So kind of like Gru. Like, he's a villain, but he's nice. But I guess he ends up, I don't know.
Don't spoil.
Right. Yeah, sorry if you haven't seen this movie that's been out for 10 years.
No. They keep making sequels, though, so you never know where he's going to end up. Is he going to be bad again? Is he going to be good again? What's this going to be? He's kind of an anti-villain now, isn't he? But at any rate, it's very much like that. The superheroes and villains, they have secret identities. And that's kind of what people like me have to do, is we have to keep a couple of identities. We have a very compartmentalized life, and we have to maintain those compartments. I had a conversation with somebody close to me very recently about that very thing, about how difficult it is to come into the life of someone who's as closeted and compartmentalized as I am. It's probably an adjustment for people who aren't used to that. There's a lot of circles that I don't let mix, because if they mix, bad things happen to me. very painful things. So it's an unnatural way to live. How do we make it better? For one thing, doing better PR. I think that, I've gone on record a number of times saying that I favor diplomatic atheism more than the firebrand kind, but I'm also willing to acknowledge the use of firebrand atheism. And it's even kind of a false construct to paint them like they're really two opposite things, because they're not. I mean, I critique religion all the time, which is usually the purview of the firebrand atheist, but I critique it constantly. I just am respectful when I do it. I don't call people stupid. I don't assume that it's a lack of intelligence on their part. And a lot of that's because I'm a former believer myself. So I can only go so far in thinking they're stupid, because I was one of those people too.
Yeah.
The more I insult them, the more I'm insulting my own intelligence. But people who have never been believers in these things, they generally don't understand how it's possible that anybody ever could unless they're stupid. And I've had to spend a lot of time explaining to people who have never been religious that those of us who aren't stupid and weren't stupid. We had reasons for believing the things we believed, and I can kind of lay out what they are for them. But this is one of the reasons why I distinguish between the nuns and the duns. The nuns are the ones who aren't religiously affiliated, but they may not have ever been. And the duns are the ones who were, and now they're just done. And there's a different quality to the way they approach religion and religious discourse, because they generally have an appreciation for an ability to empathize with people who are devout. And we need more of that conversation in public, put out front. And personally, I would like to see that done by the major organizations that do that. Like American Atheists, for example. I think American Humanist Association does a pretty decent job of that. They have both sides going. They have the litigious side going, which I think is necessary. We do have to fight things in the court, because nobody gives up positions of privilege by asking nice. You have to actually fight them. But it's like walking softly and carrying a big stick, right? You can take them to court when they're not following the law, and you can be ruthless about that. But you can also be a nice person and not talk down to people. And some people can't handle that. Some people cannot look at a Christian and not insult them. And I just have no patience for that. It's fine if you want to critique religion, but can you not treat the other person with the same amount of respect that you want them to treat you? So that could help, I think, if we could learn to do that.
And I think it takes all different types of voices to get that message across, because you have to get you have to get attention somehow. So I think it's like you mentioned American Atheists in particular.
They like to use approach.
and I mean, it just so kind of happens that's kind of how I like to do things too. But I think there's a big difference between I don't know what I would consider myself, but I know most people might consider me to be like firebrand, or we'll say a bit aggressive.
Somewhere on that end of the spectrum.
And what I say, so that's kind of where I fall. But I'm always, I feel like I'm always extremely clear with anytime I say anything, post anything, or engage any comments. It's always about the ideas, never about the people. Because like you just said, like I don't think these people are stupid. Like they've been indoctrinated and brainwashed since they were a child, and they've been told this, and they've been since they were a fetus, they were told, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to go to hell, and everybody you love is going to go to hell, and everything's going to be awful because God loves you, but if you don't love him back, you're going to hell. And so I think people who do that are just assholes, and I wouldn't even consider them to be firebrand atheists. They're just assholes, and I think it's great to critique those people, but I think we need that balance. We need people to get the attention, and then we can have people who are more, I guess, calm or not as in your face about things. Kind of, either if you want to view it as coming in and cleaning up the mess that they made after we got all these pissed off, Christians now or whatever religion we're discussing. If we want to come in and clean up that mess, or just explain in a bit more nuanced fashion, I think everything like that is beneficial in its own way.
The way that I usually resolve that tension is by describing the firebrand and diplomatic approaches as tools in the toolkit,
Mhm.
and you use them at different times, based on what's appropriate for the,
absolutely.
for the audience. I think that the slash and burn American atheist approach to billboards that are meant to shock and, piss people off, I don't think that works in Jackson, Mississippi. In fact, right now, you can't even get a billboard up in Jackson, Mississippi. We got strip clubs advertising billboards, but they will not put up an American atheist billboard. They got one up in Tupelo for, I think, maybe 2 hours.
And that was it. Just like
that. And West Monroe, Louisiana had one up for a couple of hours and it was gone, like same day. The community just gets so up in arms because they take it as a personal insult to them. Again, half-naked women on the boards, not so much, but the atheist, it's just, you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Even that can be offensive. But you know what? At least that is not as much as a slap to people. That's reaching out to the ones who are already on the same side of that aisle. And it's more of a positive message, So that kind of approach would be better than the ones that say, skip celebrating Christmas this year. It's a myth. Because no, that's not true. In Jackson, Mississippi, most people don't think it's a myth. They really believe these things happened. So there has to be a willingness to understand your audience. And I think one approach works in one environment, maybe even on a national stage, but like in a place like the Deep South, I think a diplomatic approach is the only one that will get anywhere because nobody's going to listen to you. There's this thing called the backfire effect, where if you throw out too much at a person that's contradictory to what they believe, they are going to just dig their heels in more and listen to you even less. And you're not getting anywhere. At that point, you're just...
Are we talking about Christians now, or are we talking about Trump supporters in the last election? I'm kind of confused.
Is there a difference?
But it translates to so many things because this kind of conversation, like I think about, some of the stuff I'm working on with like the parenting, and like the movie I'm making focuses on like anti-vaccine and anti-GMO people, and like how do you talk to them and how do you change minds and all of that. And the thing is that there are people like that will never change their minds, and we're not like, let's not fight with them like in internet comments or in real life or whatever. But then you have these conversations like geared toward the middle, where you try to be as calm and rational as possible, but also try to find the common ground you have as people as much as possible. Because even though, I mean, I will differ greatly in so many ways from, say, like, I'm just going to bring it to the sciencey stuff, from like a parent who, believes that like GMOs are the devil. Like, this parent and I are not going to see eye to eye on that, but there are probably so many things that we do have in common, like kids, or like where we live, or, whatever, where you can have conversations, and then you don't have to have the tough ones right away.
Right. Basic people skills could really come in handy here.
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's that like common ground and communication that translates to so many of these kind of dicier issues, the religion stuff, the political stuff, Jesus Christ, of course. And and then all like some of these issues around science and pseudoscience and all of that, where it's not just about like, quoting the Bible back at people, or, giving them the results of all these different studies and evidence. It's like, let's be people first, and then let's maybe get to some of these conversations. I don't know.
Well, but if you've started off by establishing some kind of rapport and relationship, it makes a huge difference. And so, I think you've answered your question there. I think just helping to reestablish that atheists are people too, and they have a lot of the same interests and goals. I think just being a normal, nice person, I think, is the biggest need. And believe it or not, that's a thing you have to say out loud, because people don't seem to get that. Some people feel, honestly, I think what happens is, like you said, some of them are naturally assholes, and they like to get a reaction out of people, and they use the firebrand atheism style as a cover for a personality trait that they want validated, and they find validation in that, just like the firebrand preacher does, who's out preaching fire and brimstone. They like authoritarian style leadership, and they found an umbrella to be under that allows them to use that and to wield that like a weapon over people to make them feel powerful. I think atheists are the same way. I think they have their messages that make them feel like they are in the right, It's a sanctimoniousness, of a different kind. It's an intellectual sanctimoniousness that makes them feel better than everybody else. And that's why they act like assholes, because they need that. They're insecure. And I have no patience for that. There's a point at which I can tell it's crossing that line with some people. And I'm not gonna come behind them and say, okay, you've got your style and I've got mine. When it gets like that, I'm gonna say, no, you're actually undermining everything we're trying to do.
And then I guess with these conversations or these interactions, I mean, I think obviously I would hope that sometimes people might say, okay, let me think a little bit more critically about whatever topic it is that we're trying to discuss. If say you were having a conversation with somebody who is in a similar position to you, kind of like Deep South, questioning their faith, what advice do you give to that person? Because obviously there's probably compelling reasons to just stay in a religion, in a faith, because of community, because of those kind of things.
That's a hard one. So what do I tell them? What were you gonna say?
Yeah. Where do you go with it?
No, I was asking.
Oh, Dan.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna say, I think that's why so many, of course I can't speak to Mississippi and hardcore Christian evangelicalism like that, but I think that's why so many that even have those doubts stay with it is because of that sense of community. And like you said, you lost, you feel like, I mean, of course you didn't, but you feel like you lost, everything. And now you're this shell of a person now who has nothing.
Yeah, no, it's a real issue. And because of the number of things that I've lost, I am less likely to encourage people to leave. It's not that I don't think they should follow their conscience, but I do know a little too existentially that if they do leave, there's a good chance that it's going to be a long time before they reestablish a new community if they live around here. Now, other parts of the country, maybe not so much, but other parts of the country, they're probably having less of a struggle about that to begin with because they find other things to get involved in. There's a club for this and a group for that, and they're not overtly religious, so there's a lot of places where you can build community. Around here, every sub-community and subculture is so rife with religion that there's almost nowhere to go where you are free from it. You almost have to explicitly create a community for non-believers for that to even exist in any form. And that's problematic too, because now you've got a group that exists solely to validate atheism. And that's a one issue kind of thing. And there's not going to be a lot you have in common. One of your questions that you forwarded had to do with how to engage in politics. And well, it wasn't you. It was somebody who commented and added a question in, asked whether politics could be something that's added to our focuses, our foci, as atheists. And my answer to that is, on the one hand, we have to engage in civic engagement. We have to get involved in the civic process or we won't have any influence. But on the other hand, there are not a lot of things we all agree on politically. I mean, the only thing we as a group agree on is atheism. And that's such a small fraction of what it means to be human. The God question is just one question out of thousands, So there might be more that we have that are not in common as atheists. And so I don't know how well we can organize around political issues if atheism is supposed to be the reason why that group is together.
Right, that's like our thing is we don't.
You don't believe in God, so that's the
do one thing. We don't all have to agree.
Right.
That's the entire point.
Right. We don't respond well to instructions being told what we are supposed to believe. But I would say to those people, first of all, that they need to engage in hunting for friends online, for starters. I mean, they need to look for people within their area too, if at all possible. That would be ideal. But it's very hard sometimes to find people in your area who are not Christians. They're out there, but they're all closeted just like you. So if you live in South Georgia, somewhere in a small town, you might be the only atheist that you know. And it's not something you can bring up at the coffee table, the dinner table. You can't be at a restaurant and go, anybody here an atheist? And they're just
nope.
No. And even the ones that are going to say no, because they don't want to lose everything. But I would say that they need to look online and try to find ways to connect with people. And even though that's that's less gratifying than people in your vicinity, that might be the best you can get. And the internet is a lifeline for people like us who are in the middle of the Bible Belt or who are even in smaller towns. At least I'm in a big enough town that I could find a couple of dozen people to get together with if we have enough time to plan. And we might not have a ton in common as a group of people, but we at least can commiserate about this one thing.
Yeah.
But if you're in a small, tiny town, I would say the internet's going to be a lifeline. Following blogs, following podcasts, meeting friends that way. People that are friends of mine on my Facebook wall, I use my wall constantly to try to connect people, almost like a little community, because I know how many people that are friends of mine don't have any other way to find people but on Facebook walls. And I use a lot of controls for who sees what. Again, it's those compartments. There's a lot of controls about who sees what on my wall so that people can feel safe there. These are the sorts of things you have to do. So I would suggest that, finding friends, maybe even getting away to a conference once in a while. Because once you get to meet people, you see that you're not alone, and you form friendships there that you can build on over time. Finding books to read and podcasts to listen to can be a lifeline. Books didn't help me much for whatever reason. Most of the books that I found were written from the perspective of people who had never been a Christian before. And it was a lot more harsh and critical. Some of the Four Horsemen, they didn't do anything for me.
Because you couldn't relate to them,
their
right?
perspective at all. And they couldn't relate to me.
Yeah.
And I could feel that. And I think anybody else who's struggling with their faith, I think they would probably have a similar experience to me. I think more often than not, they would read the sort of vitriol in Christopher Hitchens' book, or maybe one of Dawkins's books, and it just rubs them the wrong way. They're still reading it with like Christian eyes, and they need something that's going to ease them into it. Which is something I want to do. I want to try to write some more that will help introduce people in a gradual way to the process of thinking through them. Not trying to push them out the door, but just kind of say, you know what, here's some of the things that you're struggling with, and here's why it's okay to be struggling with those things. So I think finding books, finding podcasts and friends online, getting away to conferences, and then I would not push them to come out too quickly. I usually tell people not to come out unless they've already got, number one, financial independence. So I don't tell 22-year-olds who are still living with their folks to come out to their folks. It's not going to go well. Just telling you, they're going to, even if they're nice, they're going to be very, very tempted to use their position of influence and financial independence or dependence to try to coerce you back into believing in Jesus. They will do that, even the nice ones. But the same thing is true for social support as well. If you don't have a large social support network, I would not advise jumping out and telling everybody you're an atheist, not if you're in like a very religious place. I would tell people to wait until they've got enough of a support network in place that they know they can handle whatever the worst possible backlash could be. And then if they come out and there's no backlash, then great. Now they've got a whole bunch of friends that they made, and they spend a whole bunch of time reading books and listening to blogs or listening to podcasts that help them kind of think through everything.
Well, see, and this is why I really appreciate your approach, and why we like to have people on this show who have kind of left religion and tell their stories, because I think it's an accessible way to talk about, lack of belief, that it's a journey from one place to another, and that maybe there's somebody listening who can relate to that, and and doesn't just go to like Dawkins or Hitchens, who like, I love their books, but I was a different audience. I wasn't coming from that place of like super strong belief ever, really. So I think all of these different perspectives are really important. As we kind of like wrap up now, can you tell everybody where to find you on the internet?
Okay. Well, you can just go to godlessandDixie.com for one thing, and that'll bring you to the Patheos page. It'll redirect you. And right now, Patheos is hosting Godless and Dixie, which I'm really happy with because they do a good job. There's a lot of ads that you have to fight, but I think they're supposed to be working on a new site design sometime this month, which would be great. A lot of great other people that write for Patheos, and I really like being a part of that community because we kind of push each other and nudge each other, and sometimes we fight each other, but it's always an intramural fight, even within the different channels. So godlessanddixie.com. There's Twitter, at Godless and Dixie. It's just pretty much, it's a unique name. So once you look it up, you'll find it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. And,
sure. Happy to be here.
Come back sometime. Talk to us again.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was like fantastic.
Cool. I hope we got off the subject a good bit and didn't cover a lot of these questions.
But it's like I have that just in case. But like I prefer the ones that like don't really need to like look at like, oh, what can we talk about for the next little while? Like
I'm a teacher for a living, so I have no trouble filling an hour.
Yeah. So no, I really like these conversations. So
good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I had a good time. Thank you for that. Where are you from originally?
So I'm from Connecticut, and I'm in Connecticut right now, actually.
You sound almost Canadian sometimes.
Do I?
You say a boat. You have this one thing you do with the word "a boat" that sounds almost like you're from like Great Lakes, maybe. Like
Canadian? No, I'm from Connecticut. I'm New England.
There's just like this one phrase that you say that sounds almost Canadian.
Well, then I could like flee to Canada because of the Donald Trump era, and people would be like, "Oh, you fit right in." Like I was like, I lost my passport, or I lost my Canadian identification.
Here's my maple syrup. I promise.
Like I'm good. Yeah. So, all right. Well, good to know. I have this accent that I could like.
Apparently, just every once in a while. Of course, maybe everybody sounds like that to me because I'm so far south.
But see, you don't have a super strong Southern drawl.
I was definitely expecting y'all and.
Well, I do whip that out, and the more I've had to drink, the more it starts to draw out. But, it largely is dependent upon who I'm talking to, and I don't even do that on purpose. But I mimic the way other people talk by habit. So
yeah.
One question I wanted to ask you, because we always have a segment because we do get a little aggressive about mocking religion here.
Mm-hmm.
We always have a God of the Week because if we're gonna never run out, because there's like thousands to choose from, and we're not going to thousands. Sure. So do you have a favorite God that you can think of beyond of course the one true God?
Well, so there's some that I've studied over the years that are kind of fun. There's so many different inappropriate ways I could go with that. I like some of the Eastern gods because in Eastern spirituality they blend sexuality and religion a lot more naturally than we do here.
That's been like the last 2 months of gods that we've done. Like it's been. No, we're not complaining because it gives us like so much like material to go off.
So much material.
It really is. But one of the things that I discovered when I was studying the book of Galatians is that there is a historical reason why Paul said something about wishing that the Judaizers would castrate themselves. I don't know how much you know about the story of the book of Galatians, but the book of Galatians is written to a church in Asia Minor that's now modern-day Turkey. And at the time, the Jews were coming up from Jerusalem, and they were trying to convince the new Christians who were Gentiles that they needed to become Jews. And among the requirements of becoming a Jew is, of course, you have to go under the knife and be circumcised.
Yep.
So if you can imagine being a grown man being told you have to have a bit of your thing cut off, that was not a popular.
Penis here. We're all adults.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Wow. Anyway, so
it's important. Yeah, it's important to use anatomically correct terms.
Yeah, you're right. So
I'm a social worker. Like I'm telling you that. Like
you're right. I agree.
But like, holy shit, though, that's
really something. So and Paul, God bless him, understood that there is no way you're going to sell this religion to a world of Gentiles if you have to cut penises as a way to get in. So, he revamped the whole thing and said, no. Circumcision was always meant to be a metaphorical thing. It's about putting off the.
Is he like the first, like, this is a metaphor? Like, this is.
Yes, exactly.
The cracker does not really turn into flesh. It's a metaphor.
Right. He turned the whole thing into a metaphor, and it made it acceptable to Gentiles. They're like, oh, so we don't have to get cut on our dicks, At any rate, he says something about wishing the Judaizers would accidentally castrate themselves if they won't shut up about this contention, because many of them believed that they needed to continue making everybody good Jews. Turns out that in that region of the country, there was a god or goddess called Cybele, Cybele, and it was more of a matriarchal religion. It was the women who were the priests. And the men were like the servants. They were the peons who did all the hard work and the dirty work. And there was a funny gender bending sort of tendency among this religion, where the women kind of wore the pants in the religion, and the men would grow their fingernails really long, and they would wear like kinds of makeup and long flowing gowns. But one of the things that they wanted the men to do was to castrate themselves. And so the priests of Cybele had to do that. They had to castrate themselves, not just circumcise, but castrate.
Just like the full.
They had to become eunuchs.
Wow.
Yeah, they had to become eunuchs to serve the priests, the priestesses. So yeah, that was pretty wicked religion. And when Paul came to that region,
though.
Yeah. Now, at any rate, yeah. So Paul came to that region, and he just, that was one of his first things was, well, why don't you just go the whole way and just cut everything off? If this is what you're going to do.
Oh my God.
So he was being metaphorically digging a knife, into them, and apparently he was successful, because Judaism did not take hold in that area, and Paul's version of Christianity is the one that won. And they reinterpreted Christianity to be about spiritual things instead of, cutting penises and not eating pork. So
wow,
he was successful. But Cybele is an interesting goddess.
I think I'll be looking her up on Wikipedia
She's
and checking her out. And
one of the things that they did was they would have a bull come stand above the people who were supposed to be forgiven of their sins, and they would cut the throat of the bull. And you would stand under the bull, like there was a grate that you would stand under, and they would let the bull just bleed all over you. And that was how you got washed of your sins. It was part of their rituals. It's a gross barbarian.
Then you have to go wash the blood off, so then you're washing off what.
Yeah, but it's okay, because now you're spiritually clean. You just, as long as you've cut your nuts off in the process.
Awesome. Religion is savage,
isn't it? You know what? Ours is actually not that bad when you compare it to that.
That's just a whole other level. Like,
isn't it? Yeah.
Wow.
It's a British age.
Wow. Jesus Christ.
Cybele.
Wow. Well, thank you for that, because I will use that for God of the Week. I'm all about these really weird.
A boat. You said it again. A boat. I'm all about it. That's it. That's what I'm talking about. A boat. I'm on a boat that. Told you.
Oh God.
No Canadian anywhere in your family? Like a grandmother?
No.
Okay.
Unless maybe I need to do like a 23andMe or something.
We're gonna launch an investigation into this. This is gonna be
genetics getting your accent, but it's worth a try.
It's worth a try. Let's pretend. Yep. All right.
Well,
all right. So Dan, let's just let him stop the recording.
Yeah.
And make sure it all uploads.
Just hold on a second here. And thank you people for watching us here